Hey there, audio friends, MrAyrit here. Welcome to my little home theater hi-fi setup down here in my basement. Now, I did a little bit of a video on this a while back where I made the switch from a 7.1 system with a typical AV receiver to these Yamo speakers. These are the S809s. And then I've been kind of on the hunt for the right amp to pair with them. I've been pretty much driving them with the Soundcause SGD1 DAC, which I really like, mainly because it has a remote and I like the way it sounds, but none of my power amps up here have remotes, so that's a key feature of it. But basically, what I've got for you today are 3 different amplifiers, and I'm gonna talk about how they kind of stack up against each other and ultimately which one that I'm deciding to keep for my system here. So the amps that we're going to be looking at today are the Fosi Audio HDA1, the Emotiva BasX A100, and then over here I've got the Topping LA90, which is by far the most expensive one, and that one was actually loaned to me by Fosi Audio, so thanks to them for that. So let's take a closer look at all these units, see what kind of features they have, and then of course we'll talk about the sound, and then again ultimately which one I am keeping for my system down here. All right, friends, we're back at the desk here where we can maybe a little more easily take a look at these different amplifiers, their form factors, their features, and all that. So we'll start talking about these. We'll do the topping first. It's about the same size as the Fosi, significantly smaller than the Emotiva, and probably the best built of the bunch. The knob feel on it is really good. Nice, big, smooth volume knob there. Little power button on the front here. And then when we spin around on the back, you can see this is where this one gets a little bit interesting because we've got 3 different sets of inputs here. Now, these are RCA inputs slash XLR inputs, which is a little bit different and kind of stands out here. So if you want to use RCAs, you have to get like something like these little adapters here, which I'll link to them down below. I bought just a pack of them for like $6 on Amazon or something like that. So that's a little bit different here. A lot of input features. You've also got some interesting things over here where you've got low and high gain mode. You've got a firmware update button here. You've got stereo versus mono you can run this thing in. You've got volume and bypass, and then you've got this 12-volt trigger thing, which is like if you get the whole big topping stack, you can, plug in some sort of a remote trigger that you can control it with a different device. You see their power cable here is a little bit different. You know what? I better go get the power cord just so you can see that because it's a big old brick. Okay, so this is the power cable for this guy, and you can see it's got that special little connector there that kind of screws in and locks in there, and then it's just a giant power supply brick here that you have to figure out something to do with. So I don't particularly care for that, but I mean, it is what it is, and it keeps the actual unit a little bit smaller. So as far as like input options and just kind of special little features, I mean, the Topping LA90 definitely has more going on than the other amps as far as inputs and just kind of special little things, that it can do. Not that I think probably most people need that stuff, but, I don't know. Maybe that's right up your alley. Maybe you do need that stuff. Let's move to the simplest of the bunch then, which is the Fosi Audio HDA1 amplifier. Now this one perked my attention because it's a Class A amplifier and it's fairly cheap. It was like $200 new. I'm not even sure if you can buy them new anymore, but I was able to pick this one up on eBay for, I don't know, like $100 or a little bit more than that, right? It's dead simple though. So when you're looking at what does it do, you've got your binding post for banana plugs, or you can just screw regular wires in, which is similar quality to the LA90. This one just uses the regular kind of PC power cable here, which I like. And then all you do is you've got a couple of RCA ins, and that is about it. There's a power button on the side, and then you've got the volume knob on the front. The volume knob doesn't feel great, but the overall build of this is really solid. So I would say probably second place as far as build quality would go to the Fosi in this little lineup here, but this is the least functional of all the amps. So finally here, the big guy, the Emotiva BasX A100. Now this is by far the largest amplifier of the bunch, and as far as like what it can actually do that I think is functional, I feel like this one is quite a bit more functional than the other two, just because you've got a few things going on here. Volume knob on the front, of course, feels pretty good. Headphone out, which this has a surprisingly decent headphone amplifier in it, okay? And then if we come around on the back here, you can see that this guy has, you know, kind of cheaper looking binding posts back here, but it's still got the option for banana plugs. You've got input RCAs and output RCAs, which I think could be a really good thing because you could run perhaps like a subwoofer with this guy. Might be something that you'd look into. And then over here, you've got a little bit of trigger thing going on, kind of like, I guess it's kind of like maybe the LA90. I didn't use either of that, but it's there, I assume, so you can trigger it to turn it on or off with another device if you want to. You can see the power button here, power cable in, which is just a 2-prong, and then on off auto. I don't even know what that does. Oh, okay, so I wasn't quite sure what this little trigger was, but this has to do with the trigger thing here. So this button, you can turn it on, you can turn it off, you can let it be auto. Again, I didn't try that, I didn't use it, but since both the LA90 and this have it, it maybe is a little more popular of a feature than I understand, because I'm honestly not a big stereo hi-fi guy. I'm mostly a headphone person, so I'm kind of new to the world of hi-fi power amps myself. So that's kind of the tour of all these. I mean, as far as just looks and simplicity and things go, I mean, the LA90 is hard to beat for that. But, you know, the Fosi A100 honestly isn't bad either. The Emotiva probably looks, it's probably the cheapest feeling of the bunch and probably has the least appealing design, at least in my opinion, if that type of thing matters to you. It also has a blue LED ring when it's on up front, which I'm not a huge fan of. Both the Fosi and the Topping just have little white lights, which are a little bit simpler, a little more subtle, which I appreciate. Okay, so that's the tour of the units themselves. Which honestly, you know, I mean, obviously you want to know what kind of inputs, outputs, and different features they have, but really the looks, I mean, probably aren't a huge factor, at least not in my book. Although form factor is cool. So I like that the Fosi and the LA90 are a little bit more compact. You could probably fit them a little bit tighter spaces, especially if you're looking at putting something like on your desk or something like that. Whereas the BasX probably isn't going on anybody's desk. So let's talk about sound, because that's what really matters. Now, all of my impressions were done with my Yamo S809s. That's just the speaker. When I demoed a few, that's what I ended up on liking the most. Just to recap, I like them. They're kind of a V-shaped sound. They sound large. They're pretty exciting speaker to listen to, and they have good enough bass that I feel like I can get by without a subwoofer, which was a big reason why I picked those. So all these impressions are going with those speakers coming out of the SoundCause SGD1 DAC, which again is important for me because it has the remote, because none of these have a remote that they come with to control volume and things like that, which is pretty much a necessity, right, if you're going to use it like I am for like a home theater system. So of these three, let's talk about the one that I liked least as far as sound goes, and that was ironically the most expensive one, which is the LA90 here. The LA90, while, I mean, if you've been watching the channel at all, then you know that with most of Topping stuff, I say the same thing about all of it. It's well built, it performs reasonably well, but it just doesn't excite me, it doesn't pull me in. I find them to be rather sterile sounding, and I honestly feel like the LA90 falls into that same category. It's super clean, it's super well separated, it's a very articulate amplifier, but it just doesn't draw me in the same way these other two amplifiers do. it felt a little flat to me as far as soundstage goes, although it did have probably the best separation and width of the three, but it just didn't come out and pull me in, you know, the way that these other two amps do. So if you're looking for just a dead clean amplifier, I mean, it's hard to argue with it. When you're listening to it, it sounds good. It just doesn't sound special to me. And again, maybe if it was paired with the right speakers or the right DAC, you could get that combination going. But for me, I just found it to be a little too clean. I thought the mids were pulled back just a little bit more than I wanted to, so I didn't find like dialogue in movies and things like that came through quite as clear as it did on the other two amplifiers. And just as far as just emotional experience when I'm listening to music, I also just felt like it just fell a little flat for me, which is nothing new with Topping products. But again, a lot of people are going for that type of sound. So if you just want a super clean signal that's reasonably high resolution, I mean, the LA90 does that, but it does it at a pretty premium price, I feel like. And maybe not in the world of hi-fi, but just for me, I didn't find that it had the synergy with my system to make it work. So yeah, it actually comes in third place for me. Second place was the Emotiva, the BasX A100. Now, this guy was a little more exciting, and it pulled me in a little bit more. Smaller soundstage as far as width goes, but a little bit more depth, I felt, than the LA90, so it would pull me in a little bit more. Bass was punchy, but it didn't have the texture and detail of the LA90, which the LA90 also had a significantly more noticeable sub bass, I felt, than these other two amplifiers. So the A100, it's hard to argue with. It's a good, I feel like it's a solid starting point for getting into like an amplifier, and then you could decide if you want something that leans a little more airy, a little more depth, maybe a little bit bass lighter. I'm describing all qualities of the HD-A1, by the way. And then between the more sterile, flatter LA90 that's cleaner. So the A100 was right in the middle for me, where I feel like I could live with it and be pretty happy with it. And honestly, the fact that it has a headphone amplifier built into it was almost enough to make me want to keep it, because I do listen to headphones quite a bit when I'm watching movies and playing video games and things like that on my system, and being able to just have it all in one unit would be really nice. Plus, I like the idea of the RCA outs, because I feel like I could add a subwoofer if I felt like it down the road. But again, it just didn't quite pull me in as much as the Fosi. So oddly enough, when it comes to all these amplifiers, the one that I like the best was actually the cheapest of the bunch, and it's probably the least refined of the bunch as well. I think the sound of the Fosi, though, is special in that it throws like an incredible depth with its soundstage that honestly just sucks me into it and just makes everything a little more believable. And it's not as high resolution as these other two amplifiers. The bass is probably my biggest picking point with the Fosi. Like, it doesn't hit nearly as hard as the other two, and I feel like I do miss that a little bit. But for the most part, I get used to it after I'm listening to it for a while, but it's not quite there with the bass. And then also, it has almost like a little bit of a thinner timbre to it, which usually bothers me, but just again, something about the way that it images and throws a soundstage, while it's probably the smallest width of the bunch, I feel like it had the most depth of the three. And you know, honestly, it was, for me, it came down to like when I'm watching a show or listening to music, it kind of disappears, honestly. The Fosi does with those Yamo speakers. I have just like this, it's just sound is happening, and I don't think about it being like a stereo image or anything like that. It pulls me in and makes it all believable. I also feel like the dialogue is crisper on the Fosi than on the other two, and there's just something about it. I know it's not technically as good as the other two. I mean, I can hear that it's the lowest resolution. It's maybe a little bit looser. You know, it's not as tight, and it just doesn't feel as clean or as just articulate, but there's just something about the sound of it that's lively and just feels, you know, it brings life to movies and to music, and it just pulls me in and honestly makes me just not think about it too much. So I'm just listening to music, I'm just watching my movies, and I'm not thinking about the gear too much when I'm using the Fosi, and I guess that's what I'm going for, right? Like, I just want to be able to turn on a show and just kind of get lost in it and not nitpick the sound too much and not think about it too much, and the Fosi just does that for me. So that's why that's the one that I'm going to keep. The one big caution that I would put out there with the Fosi is it is a noisy amplifier. Like, the noise floor on this thing is pretty high, to the point that I have to set the volume pretty low on it and pretty much crank my Soundcause HDD1 to get a clean signal at the levels that I want to hear it. If I turn the volume up on the Fosi past even like 11 o'clock, I start to get a pretty noticeable hiss through my ammo speakers, which that drives me absolutely insane. So thankfully with the Soundcause, I can get things tweaked just right, so it's perfect for me, but I could see that being a huge downfall with the Fosi for a lot of people, especially if you don't have volume control on the DAC that you're using with it. So what an interesting experience for me to try out these amplifiers in a realm that I'm not super familiar with. Again, like I said, I'm not a big hi-fi stereo person. I'm much more of a headphone listener. So it was interesting diving into here, and then again, it just goes to show you that it's not always about how much you spend on something. It's about what appeals to you as a listener. And for me, it's the Fosi. So that's my speaker amp roundup here. So the Fosi will be my amp going forward. I do have a couple other cheaper amps that I'll probably review, but they're not going to displace the Fosi. I'll tell you that much right now. So stay tuned for those. As always, I thank you for watching. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. I do a lot of headphone videos, but also just kind of audio videos in general. So happy to have you. I appreciate your time. Hopefully I'll see you in the next one.